I took an oath at the start of medical school, the Hippocratic Oath, to do what we can to preserve human life.
Okay, so with that out of the way, let's talk about euthanasia. So we distinguish the two first. So I just searched it up. And active euthanasia is killing a patient by active means. For example, injecting a patient with a lethal dose of a drug. So that's like, so they didn't have to die, and then they killed. So like medical suicide, right? Yeah. So, any thoughts?
I took an oath at the start of medical school, the Hippocratic Oath, to do what we can to preserve
Save
human
life.
life. Yeah, and I think that is like a very direct way of going against that oath. But for me, what makes euthanasia something that I will never do is the existence of palliative care. So if you don't know what palliative care is, it's basically just like it's almost like a subset of geriatric medicine where it's given to patients who have terminal illnesses, and it's just giving them a very peaceful passing, not necessarily in a way of giving euthanasia, but more just making sure they have a very nice time in the hospital, giving them what they want. Maybe like if they want a can of beer, just give the can of beer to them. But it's mainly just to ease the passing and to relieve the pain a little bit.
Like
but
fulfill
not to
their last wishes, kind of.
Yes, yes, but not to actively kill them.
Actually, I want to pick on something you said, which is because you said that the oath was to like preserve life, right? But I mean, if you take a look at it from like a suffering point of view,
Yeah.
like so let's say instead of preserving life, it's reducing suffering, right? Do you think that might change things? Like, so let's say for example, and I think it's a common like point to raise regarding euthanasia, which is the amount of suffering the patient's going through. Right, so let's say they're having like one hell of a time because they're like suffering from 5 different illnesses at the same time, old age and whatnot, and pain. Then, but they're just not dying, right? Let's say they have like another 6-7 months to go, that kind of thing, and the patient just says, just kill me, though I don't live really. Yeah, is that not like a form of mercy also? Because I mean, 7 months of suffering is subjecting somebody to 7 months of suffering, and perhaps even against their will, is arguably worse than ending their life on the spot. And even if you believe that the value of life is intrinsic, right?
There also comes a line of where you draw the suffering level, which in some ways that comes down to the patient, but
It's grey, right?
yes,
Yeah, it's
that-
very hard to pinpoint.
if you simply just say like leave it up to the patient, I think that can cause also like a lot of problems, because like the patient also may not have like the most sound mental state when it comes to an evaluation of their situation. So then there's a lot of facets. Eva, what do you think?
I think you raised a few good points. I agree with you on the point of like the line, like where to draw the line on how much suffering, like the threshold of suffering that you have to request, like for it to be allowed.
Yeah.
Like, because like suffering is is relative, right? And
Yes.
then there's also like physical suffering or like mental suffering or like emotional suffering. So I think there's a lot of nuance to it, because if we talk about like a terminally ill patient, and assuming the fact that he cannot be cured, and there are no drugs that can reduce his pain for that 7 months. I think in that case, I can see the emotional appeal of euthanasia. I think I can understand the inclination to provide euthanasia, but I think it's more useful to talk about euthanasia as more of an overall policy, and how are you going to differentiate between this level of suffering and that level of suffering, or how are you going to, like you talked about like the mental state, right, or like of the person, like whether they can make sound decisions, and like how are you going to ascertain that that person is fully independent and fully sound in making that decision, and not saying that while they are like in the throes of pain at that point in time. So, I think.
The other thing is, it's fair to say that it's an argument against simply because you can't draw the line. Like,
Yeah, I do think
if you
so.
can't place a level of suffering that you would allow euthanasia, then therefore that it just shouldn't be placed at all. That you just shouldn't allow it. Because I feel like it's definitely if you have, I mean, and I think this is good like policy making. If you don't have a clear like bar that you have, like a line drawn in the sand, right? Then it's very easy to subject to like loopholes and abuse of the system, like people who find ways to work around. Of course, I mean this is prevalent in a lot of things. Like I mean, like in the, let's say for example, to give a maybe more close to home and trivial example of like the SAF maybe, right? Then like the whole report sick kind of thing.
Yeah.
When will you give MC, let's say, and then like obviously you evaluate based on the person who's telling you about it, but then there's also like people who like the king lah, right?
Yeah.
And then I mean, either you don't give MCs at all because it's so easy to abuse, or you give MC 100% of the time to play safe, right? Not that you try to find a line, let's say. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't think it's exactly comparable, but I think you get what I mean.
I get.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's not just the line. The line, like placing the line is difficult, and that's one of the difficulties, like policy-wise. But then I think, morally, I think from my personal standpoint is that it's just incompatible with like sanctity of life. But then I understand that like in like a secular healthcare system and infrastructure, right, you cannot. It's difficult to impose like your own personal morals on a situation like this. It has to be like morals that are held widely.
Yeah.
You know.
I get that.
But then even then I feel like there's an argument to be made for the sanctity of life, even in a secular perspective.
I mean, I'm pretty sure that the law itself
places value.
Yeah, places value on life. It's not that in secular law they just like disregard it or anything. Yeah, I mean, and then I mean the very fact that the medical industry exists implies that that there is something to be valued about it. Yeah.
So I think the question at the core of it is it morally better to relieve the suffering or to maintain the life, right? Like
yes.
Yeah, but the morals, like when it comes to policy making, the morals have to follow like either a certain powerful people or the majority, depending on the state. And the thing about morals, okay, there are some things where you can say like 99% of people will say murder is wrong, right? Morally wrong. But then like when you reach a point like this, it comes back to the line, right? Because honestly, I don't believe that we can really draw a line. That's why you have seen no country, not that I know of,
No consensus.
draw a line in like in between, like it's
when
kinda,
you can use
yeah,
it.
it's kind of like euthanasia is allowed, euthanasia is banned, right?
I feel that as with most things that are banned, it also like as in most, let's say, personal decisions that are banned, like they don't allow you to make this decision. It's mainly because it affects other people also, I think. Like I mean, let's say why do we ban things like drugs, for example, right? And then I'm guessing like it's like if it only affects yourself, if it's only for your own personal consumption, then okay, fine. Like I mean, sure. But if it starts to affect other people, which is where I do think drugs does, then that's where the government steps in and says, okay, look, you can't make this decision for yourself because it doesn't just affect yourself. So that's why I think I would be okay for active euthanasia, because it's just you. Like it's I mean you could say that it makes your family sad, but I mean if you discuss with your family and come to a decision, then yeah, I mean I don't see anything wrong with it. I mean apart from the idea of intrinsic value of life. Yeah, that's the only thing stopping.
Actually, it would be helpful, right? I think there are some countries that allow euthanasia for, I think, for like a certain condition. I don't know if it will be useful to like look at these conditions. I think like Norway or like all those like Scandinavian countries, they allow. Yeah. Also just while he's checking, just be like curious, right? Like, so I think there's one time in euthanasia where they allow, it's like the doctor prepares all the chemicals, right? Then they like put the IV drip, but the patient has to press the button to start the drip. So would you? So that's like I think the most like patient independent kind of thing. But like, would you inject a patient who cannot inject himself, who cannot press the button?
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Yeah, because
it's very easy.
Problem.
It's very easy
it's
to
like
say.
the trolley problem.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, it's really a trolley
like,
problem.
Is it the same thing morally to provide the means of death and to deliver the death, right? Like, okay, but this is not a trolley problem.
Yeah, I know this is definitely not a trolley problem. So.
It says in the Netherlands, the patient's suffering must be unbearable, with no prospect of improvement. I think that's a pretty decent line, honestly.
Yes.
No prospect of improvement and unbearable amount of suffering. Suffering need not be related to a terminal illness and is not limited to physical suffering such as pain.
Yes.
It can include, for example, the prospect of loss of personal dignity or increased personal deterioration or the fear of suffocation. The Belgian law is similar. Patient suffering must be constant, unbearable, resulting in serious incurable disorder. No requirement that the patient be diagnosed with terminal illness. In Canada, patients will qualify for assistance if they have a grievous and irremediable medical condition. And then the 5 US states permit assisted dying only, so the patient must be terminally ill. So this is passive, right? Because
that's
Really, it's not passive though.
Is it not? Because it's not. It's not.
This-
Because assisted death.
Correct. No, active. I think they're a bit two different ones.
Yeah.
They are about the same. It's just that it is the method of delivery. But
So like passive is like they would have died if you didn't.
no, correct. Like a passive is like this guy is on an ICU on a ventilator. Without a ventilator, they will die.
Yeah.
So like I think active is like this guy is like gasping for breath on his own, like he's in pain, but he's not.
Survive.
He's self-sustaining, you know, like. But then you inject him with like lethal drugs.
Okay. That makes sense.
Okay, so but I think isn't it a bit worrying? Like if you look at that, like terminal illness is not required. So that means as long as you claim like that you have a mental illness that's certified by a psychologist.
Yeah, I think the part that scares me is the part that where they say it's incurable, but it may not be terminal.
Correct.
So like autism is incurable, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, and
Right.
disabilities are incurable.
Yes. Like me being like paralyzed from like the waist down is incurable, yeah. But I definitely still can live with it until I'm 90.
So it's a lot of based on the patient's perspective, and
No, but the problem is that every patient has a different perspective.
no, correct.
Yeah.
So then it becomes the case of like if in such laws, right, that means technically if you say like I suffer severe depression, right, I've gone for like counselling through the years, it hasn't worked, so I can say it's incurable, and it's great suffering for me, right, and so it's certified by like a psychologist or anything, and then I request for euthanasia. So what's the difference between that and committing suicide as someone who has severe depression? So the question would be what is different, and would that justify suicide since euthanasia is allowed?
That's true. That's a good point. I mean, active euthanasia is straight up just suicide, but in the hospital.
Yeah.
That's a good point actually, because if you allow it morally, if you allow euthanasia morally, then you have to allow suicide morally as well, right? Because
But I think the distinction there is, I think a lot of people frown on suicide, not really because of the implications it has on the person itself, but more of the ripple effect it has on like the family, the friends, everyone who depends on them maybe. But I think to me the distinction between these two is that suicide is something like, you don't really tell people if you're gonna commit suicide.
Yes,
but euthanasia is something that generally is discussed with friends and family. But in these situations, I'm not sure whether the law dictates this, but I mean, the euthanasia might just be a form of a night you really feel really painful and you just call the doctor without calling anyone else and saying just inject me with something, right? So
Would it be better if euthanasia had to require like your relatives' consent also? But then again, then you could hold them back, right?
The relatives might. There's a very good chance the relatives will just say no.
Yeah.
Because the relatives want to keep you alive.
Okay, but then isn't the whole point of the argument for euthanasia is independent, like an independent choice?
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
So okay, but in a sense, then if you're saying that the problem with suicide is that it's unannounced and not in consultation, then
Yes.
then isn't euthanasia just publicized suicide? Like, this is the date of my departure.
Disclosed
Please attend my
suicide.
send-off party.
That's true.
You know.
Wait, actually, what's your idea of what is wrong about suicide?
Suicide.
Yeah.
Like my personal
Yeah,
idea.
yeah.
Okay, so I identify as Christian, and I think morally, there's a very core belief that life is given by God, and only God can take it away. So I'm not saying that humans don't have the free will to take it away. Right? People commit suicide all the time. It's that humans should not be taking their own life, right? Because that life that they have is given by God, and is therefore sacred and something that should not be violated even by themselves. Yeah. And also, I think your point about suicide is frowned upon because of its ripple effects is true, but then I also think that there is that core wrongness about it, even if you feel like, even if your family is okay with you leaving, you know, the fact that you and yourself. I'm not very sure how to describe this, but like, I think most people will feel a sense of unease that I'm not sure how to quantify, and I haven't thought about it enough about why there is that sense of unease when someone takes their own life. Yeah,
I mean, I definitely can't like refute on the religious front. I mean, I think it's valid, you know, the idea of life being sacred. I just wonder if that's the only way to refute it, I guess. Yeah.
Because because that if you would try to convince a non-Christian,
correct.
Yeah, exactly. That's why it makes things a bit more difficult. I realize.
No. So, but then okay, I feel like Christianity doesn't have to come into the topic of euthanasia though. Maybe for some, actually for most topics, yeah. I think for some controversial topics like religion might have to come into play. I think especially for like LGBT and homosexuality, things like that, you might need to appeal to religion. But for euthanasia, I think because in today's society there is still that agreement that life is valuable.
Yes. Okay.
And that life is something that should be preserved. And that's enshrined in the law, right? And I think in most people's consciences that life is not like a means to an end. It is like the value is within that life itself, right? The value is not in what that life can provide you, or what that life can provide to others.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
So then the question becomes, so is the value of that life more valuable, or the value of that person's well-being more valuable? So that's the first problem. And the second problem is that do we price independent choice above everything else? Right.
Yeah. As in, so are there some things that you
do not allow
shouldn't be allowed to do to yourself, right? Yeah. I mean, I think let's take an easy to refute scenario, which is if somebody is not of sound mind, let's say. So if they're not of sound mind, and let's say they want to do some things like mutilate themselves, kill themselves, whatever doesn't affect other people, it's just to themselves, right? Destroy their body, that kind of thing. I think it's very easy to say we should not let them do that. As in, you know, we should restrain them and maybe try and send them to counseling or whatever. Yeah, and so I think that's one example where you can defend the fact that some people shouldn't be allowed to make decisions for themselves. That maybe something is more valuable than something about themselves. Let's say is more valuable than giving them the autonomy to do it, right? So okay, so then now we can bring it to someone of sound mind, lah, right? If you are of sound mind, should you be allowed to make a decision for your own body, your own life, let's say? Yeah, I think that's great because, and I think the reason why that's great is because we respect the sovereignty of an individual.
Correct.
Right. We respect the fact that as person to person, generally we do not want our wills to be taken away from us.
Yes.
We do not want our will to be gone against. Yeah. So I think maybe at the end of the day it comes down to which you prize more, law, sovereignty of the person's will, or the life which they live. Yeah.
In the case of euthanasia, we are saying that the well-being, the judgment of well-being or the assessment of well-being is made by the patient.
Yes.
Right? So the patient says, my well-being right now is in such a terrible state that I choose to be freed from this negative well-being as opposed to continue living. Right? So you're allowing the patient to make the judgment on that weighing of the well-being.
Okay.
But I think in a lot of circumstances in society, we make judgments on others' well-being for them. I think it's a simple case of like why school is mandatory.
Okay.
Right? If you ask children, a lot of them would say it's better for their well-being to play computer games rather than to attend school, right? And wake up at 6 a.m. every day. But because we make a judgment for them that it's better for their well-being to attend school, so we make it mandatory. I think that's just like a simple example. So we can do that because we deem children to be not of a fully independent mind,
Not mature enough to understand.
And so if a patient is in that suffering and in that pain, then the question is that, do we deem them fully independent because would their choices be clouded by their pain? You know what I mean?
Once you're in that state, you're unable to make like a very
Yes, correct.
Sound
But
design.
I think using the school example, there's a bit of a
No, I know they're not equivalent. I'm just
I
saying
get what
that,
you mean.
yeah.
But I guess okay, but I mean I just want to get back to the school example for a bit because I think we not only do it because we think the children are immature and are not mature enough to make decisions. I think it's because we know that maybe sending them to school will give like a better future outcome for them. Like we know because honestly, you ask me, I'm 21 years old this year, right? If I want to sit at home and game instead of going to school, right? And without any honestly, half my mind just telling me to just stay at home and relax, right? Because I think it's just and so in the end it comes down to whether or not we are able to make a judgment as to is them living some more better. Yeah.
So how sure we are, right?
Yeah. And I think that comes with a lot of things. I honestly think the biggest crux of this problem is people's differing views on the value of life itself. Right? Because you value life a bit higher, then you believe that they shouldn't, and you value life a little bit lower, they believe that the suffering is not worth it, right? So I think in the end it kind of goes in circles unless you address this one issue that people face. Yeah.
I agree. And it can't be addressed easily.
It's definitely
Yeah,
not.
yeah,
I mean, we're definitely not going to come to a solution.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah,
euthanasia is
yeah.
good, euthanasia is bad, right?
Yeah. I think it's just to tease out the nuances of
Yeah.
and also I think like what you said at the start, I think it's useful to weigh euthanasia against other options like palliative care.
Yes.
And how palliative care has advanced through the decades. To have we have more drugs nowadays that can relieve suffering,
Yeah.
not just like morphine and yeah. And so I think it shouldn't be considered in a vacuum, that euthanasia or suffering, you know, like we can consider like euthanasia or like palliative care with less suffering, or nothing at all. Yeah. So the weighing becomes a little bit more complicated.
Yeah.
Correct.
That's why at the start I
very
kind of said that like, if I had a choice between a very robust palliative care system, I wouldn't want to offer euthanasia because I think there are alternatives, but I think also that if the alternatives run out, but then again it's like, when do the alternatives run out, right?